Helo, Bethan Wynne, fi di cydlynydd partneriaeth natur lleol yma yn Eryri. Hi, I'm Bethan, I'm the local nature partnership up here in Eryri. I'm out here today as part of Wales Nature Week with Dr. Rachel Harvey, who will be telling us more about peatlands. So Rachel, first of all, peatlands are talked about more and more these days about how important they are as a habitat. Could you tell us a little bit more about what they are?
Yeah, so peatlands is where you find peat, and this is the really dark soil you often see in garden centres. And first and foremost, they're really squidgy, as you can tell today. There's lots of water at the surface here, so they are waterlogged. There's no oxygen in that soil, and that means only certain plants can survive here. So we've got some heathers here, we've got some sphagnum moss, and when these plants die, they can't decompose. Like in your compost bin, you've got a lot of oxygen there, so that decomposes into a soil, but that doesn't happen here because we haven't got the oxygen. So instead it forms this really dark carbon-rich peat, and that's our peatlands.
Tell us more about why they're important and why people should care about them.
Yeah, there's lots of reasons actually. So as you can see here, it's quite unique vegetation. It's not what you find in the garden. Peatlands are home to all the heathers you see. We've got this Millennia grass here. We've got also, I haven't found any today, but there are sundews, which are the UK's only carnivorous plant, a bit like your Venus flytrap. Because of this vegetation, they're quite unique spots for special birds and amphibians and insects. They're really great for biodiversity. So yeah, they're also good for carbon, as I mentioned earlier, so they store tons and tons of carbon. In fact, peatlands are so good at storing carbon, although they only occupy 3% of the world's surface, they actually store more than twice the carbon of all the world's forests put together. So it's a heck of a lot of carbon that they store. So that's really important for us when we're talking about the climate crisis, and that's where they're playing a really big role in nature-based solutions at the moment. Another thing is the water quality. So 70% of the UK's water comes from uplands that are dominated by peatlands. So they are at the top of all those water catchments, and they help filter out all the nasties in the rainwater and groundwater before it goes down into our water treatment plants, as long as they're in good condition anyway. They also act like big sponges wherever they are, either on the top of the mountain or in the valleys like we are a bit here. And this helps them regulate the water flow. So if it's a big flood, it can soak up a bit of water and slow that flood down, or if there's a drought, it can slowly trickle out some water from the peatland and reduce the effect of that drought. So really important in water quality and sort of control in a catchment. And then the last thing is they're actually quite a good history store. So peat, as I said, it doesn't degrade, it accumulates about on average 1 millimetre a year. And right where we're standing, there's about 1.5 metres of peat. So that is about 1,500 years of history. Over there, it's more like 4 metres of peat, which is nearly 4,000 years of history. And so if we think back, we can actually do a core and look at what kind of pollen is there and things like that, and work out what maybe the climate was like 4,000 or even 5,000 years ago, or just on this site here. Some peat can get much deeper than that. They are also great at preserving things. So there's been all sorts of interesting things found in peat, from treasures like swords and helmets and shields and things like that. And they're quite good at preserving organic materials, so they've even found things like giant elk or even bog bodies in the peatlands.
So peatlands sound like amazing places. They're certainly one of my favourite habitats. Could you tell us a little bit more about what's actually being done to help these places or conserve these places?
Yeah, well, I mean, attitudes over peatlands have changed over the centuries. They've not really had protection before recent decades. And for hundreds of years, they were sort of seen as wastelands, places that were quite difficult to graze, or places that were sources of cheap fuel. So people used to burn peat, and in fact, in some places in the UK, they still do burn peat. So they come and cut the peat and you'll find on a lot of Welsh peatlands there's peat cuttings around. Also, after the World Wars, there was quite a push to try and get a lot more food production on every square inch of land, and so they drained a lot of the peatlands, particularly in Wales. There's a lot of drained peatlands to try and improve it for livestock, which sort of worked. So yeah, a lot of our peatlands are damaged. In fact, 75% of UK peatlands are in some sort of damaged state, so there's a lot of them. And this means that they are, well, because they're drained, there's a lot more oxygen coming in, and it means that all of that carbon that's stored in them is suddenly being released. Because you've got oxygen-loving bacteria coming in and thinking, hey, great, all this carbon, tasty. And they release all of these greenhouse gases, so they're a massive source of greenhouse gases, which is why it's really, really important for us now to re-wet and fix our peatlands. So what we've been doing, I've been working on a project called the Welsh Peatlands SMS project, and there are plenty of other projects like it across Wales and also across the rest of the UK now, looking to restore our peatlands. And we do that by blocking up some of the ditches. You can see some in the distance over there, and we're going to go check those out in a minute. We also cover up the bare peat by planting it, and we reprofile peat hags, and these are little cliffs of peat, little erosion features, so we cover those up and make sure they don't erode anymore. And then we also talk to landowners about how best to graze the site, and we might be getting rid of conifer plantations on peatlands as well that have been planted, because they sort of act a bit like straws draining the peat. So there's plenty of things to do.
Okay. So do you want to lead the way and show us what's been done on the ground?
Yeah, let's go check it out.
So you've already mentioned how historically these sites were drained, and we can see that quite clearly behind you here with these straight lines, and we can also see it from the aerials as well. But can you tell us a little bit more about what's being done now on the ground to stop that from happening?
Yeah, so this site was actually restored a few years ago now, back in 2015 I think, so a little while ago. And these ditches were blocked, and although you can still see them quite clearly from the aerial, that's pretty much entirely the vegetation that still hasn't changed yet. And actually, if you go and walk down there, it's really, really wet, and it's actually recovering fairly well. There's quite a lot of moss coming in. It just takes a little while for the peatland to actually react. So typically after sort of minimum of 30 years, it should get to the next stage of, modified or restored peatland. On similar sites to this, we've still got lots of open ditches, so we tend to block those with what we call peat dams. They're impermeable, they hold back lots and lots of water, you get nice pools forming. We can also use timber dams, and these let a little bit of water through, so it just depends on how much water flows through your ditches, whether it's even part of a mini stream, as to how much water you want to flow through your dam and how much you can realistically hold back. So it's working with the peatlands.
Wow, amazing. And just in the space of, walking down here, we've seen so many different animals and different vegetation. Do you have any ideas on how the people who are listening to us at home, how they can go out and enjoy peatlands across Wales?
Well, the good thing about Wales is there's lots and lots of rain, so that means there's lots and lots of peatlands. Usually on the tops of the hills, and particularly Brecon Beacons, there's quite a lot in Snowdonia, certainly lots in Mid Wales. There's what we call blanket bogs, imaginatively named because they're like blankets on the hillside, and that's where there's been a lot of rain. It's where you get your really squishy ground and your heather. Those of you who are seasoned walkers have probably cursed at a few blanket bogs in your time. There are also lowland bogs and valley bogs. We're in a bit of a valley here. I know plenty of really great examples of those around Wales. There's a few on Anglesey, Mid Wales as well, and South Wales again. So it's just getting to know your local area and finding these special places.
Amazing. Thank you, Rachel, for telling us all about peatlands today.